In a world racing toward automation, where AI is taking over tasks like writing reports, analyzing data, and even giving feedback, what's left for us humans? Welcome to Irreplaceable, the podcast that explores what only people can do and why those things still matter more than ever. Every episode, we'll talk with business leaders, thought leaders, and change makers who are proving that human qualities like judgment, curiosity, and empathy aren't soft skills, they're strategic and competitive advantages. We'll explore questions like, can intuition still drive great leadership? How do we build trust in an AI-powered world? And what happens to accountability when no one's behind the algorithm? This podcast isn't about resisting the future. It's about designing it with humans at the center. Because in the race to win in the marketplace, some things just can't be replaced. Hello, and welcome to Irreplaceable, the podcast that focuses on the human traits that are needed to win in the age of AI. Our guest for today's episode is Jason Wenk. He's the CEO and founder of Altruist. Altruist is a digital-first custodian and platform tailored for independent financial advisors and is making AI a big part of its value proposition to its customers. So, Jason, that's kind of a pithy introduction. I wanted to give you a chance to introduce yourself and tell us about what you've done with Altruist.
Well, thanks for Tony for having me. I think it's an exciting time to be building AI products. For a little bit of backstory, I started my career around 25 years ago and spent a fair bit of time working with genetic algorithms. We're trying to build basically research tools. Oftentimes we'd be looking at, I would say, like tens of thousands of factors to do daily factor analysis, but we'd want the algorithm to kind of rewrite itself. And so, anyway, so some of these things I would say that we want to do, whether it would be genetic algorithms or if it was things like neural networks, the hardware wasn't there. You didn't have chips that properly worked for this. So there's a whole bunch of kind of limitations because of the infrastructure to support, advanced large models. All of that's completely changed in the past, 2 to 3 years, very specifically. I think probably starting more like 5 or 6 years ago with machine learning advancing and becoming very powerful, but almost everybody, 600 million people to my last understanding are using some form of AI pretty regularly, as simple as like an app on their phone. So I think the time is fun to be building, and you're happy to go deeper into Altruist and kind of what we're building. I'll follow your lead on where you want me to start.
Sure. So my first question relates to your mission of empowering financial advisors and not necessarily with the goal of replacing them with an AI capability.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I think so to give some examples of like the things that, obviously in our case, we're using AI in many different ways. So internally, how we build the company, how we interact with our team. We use it for compliance. We use it for customer support. We use it for engineering. We use it for creative purposes. So it's a huge part of our internal operations. And then obviously we're building products for our customers, which, as you mentioned, are independent financial advisors. So trying to find ways to make them even better at what they do. So give better advice, be able to do it with higher degree of precision, be able to do it at a larger degree of scale, which oftentimes means they're able to serve clients that perhaps historically would have been challenging for them to support. And usually this is going to be because they couldn't earn enough revenue or if the client didn't have enough assets. But, with AI, you can augment yourself and really do great work for a larger number of people, which I find most independent financial advisors is a huge part of why they started doing this for a career, is to help people. In many cases, to help people who don't always have access to great advice. So I think there's a litany of different use cases. And I think none of these are designed to completely replace humans. they're designed to make it to where, as an advisor, the best use case I can give is a real that I use personally. I still have 8 families that I still work with today. Once upon a time was a practicing financial planner. And these are folks that I've, in most cases, worked with for 15 to 20 years. So I've known them for a long time, kind of big part of their lives. And unfortunately, when you have those long tenures, that means we all are 15 to 20 years older than we were when we met. And one of my clients recently found out that they had terminal cancer, non-treatable, and they had in the neighborhood of 6 months to live. It was a really interesting conversation when they reached out to let me know. So husband and wife, they lived in Illinois, and they had a lot of concerns around how their estate would settle out, specifically because in the state of Illinois, there's unusual estate tax. It's smaller exemptions, larger tax amounts than many other states. And so what's interesting is I'd say that during the call, we talked about a few of these, kind of like concerns they had. But to be honest, the majority of the call, we just shared a good cry, like a very human reaction to people that you've gotten to know for decades. And when we hung up, of course, my AI, in our case, we have a product called Hazel. So Hazel was in that meeting with me. Hazel has a whole bunch of context. Hazel has access to 20 years worth of emails, or however many years I've worked with this client. Every note I've ever taken, whether it be a handwritten note scanned into a system or a typed in note into a CRM, has all of the data of their accounts, beneficiaries, right? So lots of different information and context very specifically for this client and the relationship that we've had for a long time. And so I was able to very quickly after the meeting actually create the work product that the client was requesting, which was, what do we do? Is there anything we need to change with our accounts or our trust or the titling of our assets to make sure that we're maximizing the exemptions we have to avoid state of Illinois in particular state taxes, but even broader federal estate taxes? And it was able to craft a perfect response email in about 30 seconds to this client. It had empathy, knew my tone, knew how I wrote, knew about how this relationship was, but it also had all of the facts because in the case of Hazel, it's an AI system very much tailored for financial advice. So it's not going to have the same level of hallucination that a broad generic LLM might have. And it was able to craft, again, this perfect sort of to-do list. Here's the conversation you should have with your attorney. Here's some ideas that you might want to broach with them. Here's the conversation you want to have with your CPA. And here's some things you can let them know that we're doing with your accounts here at Altruist. And here's some of the things you might want to talk about with your family, which are much more personal in nature. And I was able to send this off again almost immediately, again, within 30 seconds, 45 seconds of the meeting ending. So when I share that example, in no way does AI replace the human. And in no way would an AI agent by itself be able to do what those clients confided in me, right? That's very human connection and relationship that was established over many years. So I think for me, the best cases of AI use are where it functions much like this example I share here, where it takes care of the very tactical, functional work that needs to be done. And it lets the humans do the things that we're very uniquely well suited for, which is connecting with other humans.
Yeah, yeah. And I was curious about the specifics of the broader use case of registered investment advisors, independent advisors. They have unique needs. And you mentioned some of those already in this the example you provided. What are some of the other, call it important needs that RIAs have, registered investment advisors, that maybe, others who are more generic users of AI or even in, corporate settings?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the limitations that we have if we're really, I'd say any service professional is time. Time is a awfully difficult constraint, right? The laws of physics are undefeated here. But what I mean by that is, I think most financial planners, if you were to ask them, what does great financial planning look like? Imagine you had one client and you were going to optimize everything you possibly could to drive the best possible outcomes and the best possible experience, the most proactive service. What would that look like? And have them really detail that out. What they would likely end up doing is they would run through examples of what great planning looked like. So it might be things like, well, I would start with detailed budget for every client just to make sure I really understood how they were really spending money and see if there's any opportunities to get more from the cash flow that they have. Then I'd look at their savings rate. I'd make sure every dollar that they're saving is going into the right place. Are they maximizing their corporate, retirement plan that has a specific match? Are they using Roth IRAs versus traditional IRAs? Do they have children? Should they be putting money into 529 plans versus, an UGMA or UTMA account? And these are all kind of like simple things, right? But this is, savings rate planning. And then you keep going on. And I imagine this list would become, 20 plus things, including things that most planners know they should do, but probably don't. And this could be things like I would review, if I had just one client, I would review all of their insurances. So not just their health insurance and their life insurance, but their property and casualty insurance. Make sure that they aren't paying for duplicative insurance. Make sure they're not underinsured on their home. Make sure if they have a need for an umbrella policy, they have one. It's the appropriate amount. Make sure the rates on all of these policies are the most advantageous for the client possible. And so you can kind of get an idea like great planning is very comprehensive. And it covers many vectors of one's life. Now, unfortunately, that would take a lot of time. And if you were to do that level of planning, you might be limited by time to serving 20 or 30 clients. And of course, if you're limited to 20 or 30 clients and you're also trying to, pay for your own lifestyle and take care of your family and do your own savings, you might back into that and say, gosh, I can't serve anybody who doesn't pay me at least $20,000 or $25,000 a year. And that, of course, would make financial great planning and advice inaccessible for the vast majority of people. So with AI, what's really interesting is we can enable all those things, right? We can actually make it very much proactive. So you can build agents that are experts in certain things. So you could build an agent that's an expert in insurance, an agent that's an expert in budgeting, right? And you can make an agent that's an expert in investment allocation and on and on. That's really the nature of the Hazel tool that we've built for advisors, is this sort of collection of agents approach that as we continue evolving and building new agents on the core platform, advisors will be able to enable all of these different vectors of great service to clients, do it at scale so that clients, they're not limited to 20 or 30 families. They could serve 200 or 300 if they want. This might allow them to bring that accessibility cost way down. Instead of it being $20,000 to $25,000 a year, perhaps they could do this for $5,000 a year. They end up having a better business. Clients have better, more comprehensive planning and advice. And everybody's also going to do this with a lot less likelihood of burnout because there's a lot less just kind of human grind, staring at spreadsheets and doing manual labor. Like, you're letting these expert systems do a lot of this for you.
I'm certain there are competitors to Hazel out there. How do you think about staying ahead of the curve so your RIAs who are platformed on Altruist, they want to continue to use Hazel and become fans and evangelize its capabilities versus the others that are out there?
So I'm a huge fan of competition. I just think in general, entrepreneurship should be, I don't know if celebrate is the right term, but it should be certainly promoted. We need more people to ask the tough principle questions of, there must be a better way, or this doesn't seem quite right. I'd like to fix this problem. So I think just like the broader AI applications, society benefits if there's more than just Google and Apple or something, right? Like we need to have at least a half dozen frontier models. We need to have dozens of open source models and, hundreds, if not thousands of vertical platform businesses. So in other words, AI specifically for accountants or specifically for consultants or specifically for financial advisors and so on and so forth. And even within those verticals, like more competition is better for everybody. The areas that I think we're somewhat uniquely suited is that if I isolated Hazel's benefits as an example, one of the things that would happen is Hazel would enable an advisor to serve a lot more clients at the things that are planning and service and responsiveness oriented. And to your point, that might help them acquire a lot more clients. Now, the challenge, of course, is that when you acquire those clients, you eventually have to open an account for them. You have to transfer their money into the account. You need to build an investment strategy. Ideally, you need to deploy it with some sophistication around tax management and cash management. Those clients are going to have eventually at some point some ongoing cash needs. So whether that's contributions with automatic investment, or it could be distributions, it could eventually become required minimum distributions, qualified charitable distributions, and so on and so on and so on. So on. So the challenge is if the AI is so good that it just gets you a bunch more clients, but if your custodial platform is very antiquated, you've got a big mismatch here. You're now going to create a bottleneck. And I think, most great consultants I know, one of the areas that they typically focus on is where's the bottlenecks and how do we fix the bottlenecks? And I think where we've tried to build our platform is we want an infrastructure kind of wealth platform in the core Altruist business that is frictionless and without bottlenecks. And then we build AI systems that enable the human, the advisor, their staff, the people that make up a wealth management firm, and free them from the friction and bottlenecks of their daily workload. And these two things are intrinsically linked, but they're separate. And this is, I think, one of the big advantages we have. If someone's building strictly an AI product, if they're successful, they're going to create a custodial problem for their advisor customers.
Right, right. So a point solution doesn't give you as an advisor as much leverage as more of a vertically integrated solution like the one Altruist is offering.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, think about something like a meeting assistant, like as a simple task, but if something that's quite useful, the problem it solves is taking meeting notes and then syncing them across to your other tools. It doesn't help you with like opening a new account or actually helping your clients get better results. I mean, it literally just helps you with your meetings. And the same could be true of most either like agents or, again, kind of point solution AI products where they do solve for a pain point, but that pain point is, maybe one of dozens of things that you have to do to really build a successful business and deliver great outcomes for clients.
Companies are issuing manifestos about how they see AI as part of their operating model. And there's an example that comes to mind is, Moderna, the life sciences company, and they've made, they've done things like integrate their HR department with their IT department, thinking it's all AI enabled, and they're building all of their processes with AI in the center. Do you see that as part of where Altruist is headed? In other words, how do we get scale and scope and leverage from AI across the entire vertically integrated platform?
So I think we certainly are doing that both internally and externally. So to like the point of, Moderna or others, like a simple example would be if I open a new browser tab, it defaults to a product called Glean. Glean is essentially an AI tool that connects all of an enterprise application. So for a company like Altruist, that might mean our Salesforce, our Atlassian accounts for things like Jira and Confluence. It's going to connect to all of our customer support tools. So if we have chats or audit logs of customer interactions, it's our knowledge base, it's our Google Drive with all of our internal docs, it's my calendar, it's my email, right? It's everything. And so when that tab opens, instead of me having to navigate to one of these many different applications, so using your example of like HR department, if I was like, hey, when is open enrollment? I can just type in when is open enrollment and it will scan through all of these different tools that we use. There's a bunch I left out because there's also again, HRS systems and payroll systems and accounting systems, but it can go find the answer and then just give me the answer and then cite it where it comes from if I want to go deeper. And so this just allows us to internally to operate as a very connected company. And it's not kind of a world where engineers, because they're working mostly inside of, let's say, Jira or their various terminals they might be using. They operate in this kind of isolated kind of silo, and then other teams are in other areas. Basically, the the permissions we have of the various internal tools dictate our access to all of this information and allows us to really move very, very quickly. And I think the same is true when we're thinking about how AI can be used for the advisors and their staff that use our platform every day. We don't want them to have to navigate across 10 different tools. It makes a lot more sense for them to aggregate these things into a single cloud-enabled bedrock instance that's highly secure for just their firm. And now they can move a lot faster. Their AI can learn from how their firm does things. It really becomes an extension of their team. And I think America in general is a little bit, um, I don't know if the right word is pessimistic on AI, but I think people are certainly fearful. Like, oh my gosh, all these
Right.
jobs are going to be lost. And I think there's then a bunch of AI companies that are probably saying, oh, no, 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 that's not the case. That's not the case. I think we have to be a little bit realistic here, and people can get a lot more done than they could before. And this is very similar to how the internet was a great enabler, allowed for massive productivity gains in America. You go back even further to things like modern manufacturing, allowed for massive productivity gains. I think AI is going to be another one of these really big leaps that'll move at some order of magnitude in terms of productivity gains, which means that less people will be required to produce a really desirable end outcome. In plain English, that means that there'll be less need for certain jobs. And that's just the reality. So, look, there's a change that we'll have to figure out in this country, much like we did 20 plus years ago with the internet, and 100 years ago with modern manufacturing. Like, these are things that we have to still figure out.
I'm curious about your perspective on how much are you deploying retrieval augmented generation versus kind of more broadly scanning what a large model's been trained on. Anything you'd like to share on that as you think through your sort of enterprise architecture there?
Yeah, totally. So we're much more on the RAG side. So effectively, the way that Hazel operates is, it has access to a specific set of user data that is entirely isolated from other users, and it's also encrypted from our own use. So, like, even if our team, if someone wanted to say, "Hey, can tell me what Tony's been doing," I couldn't tell you anything about Tony's data. The only thing that we have any record of are what the queries are that are asked. And this just helps us with like better creating context around the actual LLMs. Do you have Hazel is internet enabled with a whole bunch of kind of context controls to try to make sure that one, it can move from model to model. So if it's looking for something with really advanced mathematics, because of the nature we're in the financial services industry, and you want to make sure that you have a really advanced reasoning model that's very specifically tuned for mathematics, it has enough logic to know that that query should be presented to this specific external model. And the same is true with like broad internet use. So if someone wants to ask a question around the tax code or a specific test state law of one of the states in the US, those are things that are not obviously going to be inside of like a RAG database. So we have to kind of find this like multimodality where if it's anything that's private and you wouldn't be able to find it on the internet, that's going to be RAG based. Only when context is appropriate will we go externally to the broader internet to bring in that specific level of reasoning that the prompt is asking for.
So, Jason, I want to maybe close out with a crystal ball question. What material changes do you think would exist in the kind of AI-enabled advisory ecosystem that are like, oh, wow, types of things?
Yeah, I think so. The first thing I'll clarify, I guess, just by saying that, like, financial advisors are fairly slow-moving creatures. Financial services broadly operates that way. Most financial advisors are still using PDFs to open accounts. They're not even entirely web-based, certainly not mobile first. You think about most of the rest of society went mobile first with their application use over 10 years ago. Advisors still aren't there, right? So advisors are going to be, inertia is going to make it a lot slower, I think, for AI systems to become this incredibly rapid evolution within wealth management. I think people will just take a bit more of a wait and see approach, and it might take 5 years before financial advisors are where maybe other industries are today. Now, as far as the capabilities, my best guess is that we will fall a little bit more into like a Moore's law, type of pace. It was certainly crushed the last few years. We were accelerating, I think, just because of the combination of you had more compute plus higher latency, massive capex spending, like everything that could kind of compound resulted in a much faster rate of change in the quality of these models. But now that you see kind of the last two or three versions, as we're recording today, a new version of Gemini released. I haven't had a chance to test it. Uh, just a couple of weeks ago, a new version of Cursor release, which is a popular coding tool. Cursor switched from Claude models to an open source model as kind of the core. Yeah, it's actually an open source model from China that they're using to power Claude Code now. Or excuse me, not Claude Code, but Cursor too. So I think what we're finding is like the changes they feel very incremental in comparison to what they felt like in early 2025 and in most of 2024, where the pace of quality improvements were just, incomprehensible. I was certainly wrong. I thought that would take 2 or 3 years from now to get to where we were in 2025. But again, at this point, I do think that we're going to see the rate normalize a bit. But in 5 years, that still means we'll probably have models that are, I don't know, 3 to 5 times more powerful than today. And if we think about what's possible, just, from a knowledge perspective, like how close might we be to super intelligence? I mean, we're talking about like, you know, I don't know, many, many gigabytes of like relative brain power. Right. So this is something like to the order of, I don't know, 2, 3 thousand times smarter than the collective intelligence of all humans. I mean, so certainly that will be there. Now, can you get the AI models to stop just making things up? Because unfortunately, a big part of what they do is they're designed to forecast the next word or the next number or the next sequence. Yeah, that probable list, okay for creative writing, not so good for like, disease, prognosis or diagnosis or like, financial calculations. These things require a certain level of efficacy that, is probably to the order of like 6 or 7 nines efficacy. It's not like 99% is not good enough. It's you need a few more nines after that. But but I do think like, look, we're going to have like incredibly powerful systems. The application layers where things are going to get much better. Meaning, so products like Hazel, for example, will probably 5 years from now, there'll be an agent for every single workflow that an advisor might do. They'll have 5 years of learning, which means that today the learning is highly variable based on the user, meaning like not all users have good notes in their CRM. Not all users have, kind of maybe they've switched emails 3 times in the last, 10 years. So they don't even have all of their old email records. They maybe have yet to scan in all of their physical documents. So it's missing a lot of the paper trail. 5 years from now, people will have 5 good years of really clean data. And this is going to allow these AI systems to replicate the human work quite well. So I do think there's going to be a world, I've said this many times to the advisor community that we serve, that I could imagine in 5 years, maybe even sooner, you'll have single person firms. So a firm that has one just financial advisor owner, and they might be able to manage $1 billion or more for their clients. So something that today maybe would take 10 or 12 employees or 20 employees, like one person could just do that. And the clients would probably not know the difference. Like they would feel like hyperactive response, incredibly accurate, very comprehensive work, affordable prices, which will allow people's money to compound faster. The outcomes will be more tax efficient. I mean, they'll just be, I think, better in every possible way than what they are today. And I think that's great. Like that's great for society. Now, the challenge, of course, is those firms that would have operated with 20 employees. What are those other? And that's what I think is the next 5 years, again, all the positives of what AI can do has yet to kind of solve for. Does that mean that, there might be 5 times as many firms? Which wouldn't be a bad thing. One of the things that we have in this country right now is there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 million people who would like to have a financial advisor, but they can't. They either don't have enough money, or they don't know where to begin, or they feel geographically isolated from localized help. So yeah, if there was, instead of three or 400,000 financial advisors, if there was 1.5 million of them, I would imagine that all of a sudden, there'd be no excuses for bad advice. There'd be no reason you couldn't get access to advice, and the overall cost would go down some, which means everyone's wealth would grow faster.
I think about because of the transformation that you mentioned of, 3x capabilities of the models. Do you think the median investment advisor will look different from the one that's today? Or do you think it's just going to be the same group of people? The tide will lift all boats?
So I do think the tide will lift all boats some, but there will be some boats that will be much better than other boats. And those will be the ones that really embrace, like we work with a handful of firms. There's one in particular that was just started in the last year. The founder and CEO is a computer scientist with a master's in computer science, one of the best computer science schools in the country, worked at one of the most successful fintech companies in America, and decided that, hey, it'd be a great time to build a modern wealth management firm and build the entire thing essentially AI native. Every kind of, like, they started by building like an AI operating system, and then effectively partnered with Altruist. And anything we don't do, they're building as like an AI, kind of first tool built directly into their core firm operating system. And so every single thing that they do, including the things that Altruist doesn't do, like we don't provide financial planning tools, we're doing investment proposals. There's a lot of work advisors still do, but this firm's building all of those tools and building them AI first with this really, really talented team of really high caliber people. And so you think like a firm like that in 5 years, it'll be very hard for a firm that's just sort of saying, well, let me just buy a couple off the shelf tools. I'll mostly do things the same way I am now, but I'll kind of go along for the ride a little bit. They'll get incrementally better. And then firms like this kind of Nuco, which is still operating in stealth, they will just be obviously and objectively better in every way from a consumer's perspective. And it makes me wonder, will consumers be ready, um, to abandon the old way? Because some people are still very relationship driven. And even if they're just kind of behind the curve, I like and trust the person, and I'm okay with that. So these things could take like a generation to change. My oldest of my 3 kids is 25, and I can say with a pretty high degree of confidence, like that 25-year-old is probably going to only work with like the most modern technologies and tools and services that exist. I don't see them walking into a bank branch and sitting down with somebody face to face and filling out paperwork. They're going to expect to be mobile first, AI first, probably like a very different even type of relationship. He happens to be a computer science graduate as well, so I'd say relatively tech forward. So society just in general over the next decade, 2, 3, 4 is going to change a lot. But in the 5-year time horizon, most things won't change.
Jason, this has been a fascinating conversation. I learned a lot, and I love diving deep into this. And I also love what you're doing with Altruist. So I want to congratulate you on your success, and thank you for your time today and for your insights.
That's been my pleasure. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on and have this conversation with you. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jason. Have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, you too.